Good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you are. It's block 14 of the Sixpenny Memories Sew Along, and it's just a lot of half square triangles. So what you're going to need is a background fabric, and I've chosen this sort of lovely green with a little bit of metallic gold in it, Celestian fabric, and you'll need four 4-inch squares. Now for your alternative fabric, I have picked my black one, and you need two 4-inch squares. Now for the third fabric, this is going to be a centre block as well. You're going to need one 3.5-inch square and two 4-inch squares. So just to quickly recap, for your background, it's four 4-inch squares. For one of your fabrics, it could be a medium or a dark tone, a contrast fabric, it's going to be two 4-inch squares. And for the fabric that's going to end up in the centre of your block, it's going to be one 3.5-inch square and two 4-inch squares. So once you've done that, you're going to grab your Prim mark and pencil. Everything I'm showing you is available on the website, which is www.six-penny.com. And I'm just going to bring you down to the board here. And on the reverse of all of your background squares, you are going to draw a diagonal line using your pencil. And I'm just using my little 6x1-inch ruler here, and you're going to draw a diagonal line from one corner all the way to the other corner, and do that on all four. Once you've done that on all four, you're going to pair two up with what was my black fabric, and the other two are going to be paired up with what would be my olive green fabric. And by marking all of the reverse of your background squares, you don't have to worry about anything else. So we're then going to pop to the sewing machine, and you're going to use a 1/4-inch seam allowance as normal. You can do that one of two ways. You can either move the foot on your machine, or I'm choosing to use a 1/4-inch seam allowance foot that doesn't have the guide. You don't want the guide on there because the foot is going to go across your fabric, and if you have that little blade, that little guide going across your fabric, you will actually, you could bend it. So can I just show you a new gadget that I have got, my storage, which is the Prim storage box, which I think is fabulous. So I'm now able to keep everything in, and it's great because I can put my rulers in, I can put my pens, I've got my pink and shears in. I'm just going to pop my ruler in there. I'm just finding a gap. I've got that much in it, and I can't do it back to front, so I'll just pop my ruler back in there. Oops. Come on, she says. Find the gap. There you are. So everything's now stored really neatly. So this is also available on the website. If you are wanting to buy anything off the website, then please use your 15% code. So back to the sewing machine. What you're going to do is I'm going to move you nice and close because we're going to chain piece. And when we're chain piecing, I'm just going to give you a little tip of when you're chain piecing lots. Chain piecing is just literally sewing one after the other. So I'm popping the machine on, I've lowered the presser foot, and the edge of the foot is going across, can you see that? Is going across that diagonal line. So I'm just sewing down there, and then to chain piece, and you're going to sew all of these together, just pop your next one in and sew all the way down. Now when you get to the end of the four that you're going to do, don't cut your threads. Just literally turn them round, just pull the threads slightly and continue sewing. And whenever you're doing half square triangles, if you do this, it's just so much quicker. If you found that your half square triangle had, fabric had flipped over, just then flip it back, no problem at all, and carry on sewing down that line. So how quick is that to sew these together? And you're going to do that with all four. When you get to the end, just take it out of the sewing machine, and at this point here you can either choose to use your rotary cutter. But first of all, we're going to snip the blocks apart. Just bring it back around here a little bit to make it less awkward. You could either use your rotary cutter and cut on that line, or I'm just using the Prim Love scissors and trimming that line there. So I'm cutting on the drawn line, all right? So then you end up with your two triangles. So what you'll now have, once you've cut all of those apart, you started off with 4 sets of squares, you will now have 8 sets of triangles. So the next thing to do is to press the triangles. So, oops, Daisy. I'm using the wool pressing mat here, which is great because it allows the heat to come from the bottom, which gives you a nice crisp seam. And I'm using the little Prim mini iron. Now, I've chosen with all of mine to first of all set the seam and then press towards or away from the background fabric. So I'm pressing towards my contrast fabrics. So once again, set the seam, and you're going to do that with all 8 sets, all 8 half square triangles, and you'll end up with the half square triangle pressed looking like that. Now, mathematically, these squares should have been 4 inches, but I don't like cutting 4-inch squares because I sometimes think when you're cutting 4-inch squares, 3 7/8 of an inch square, it just makes life a little bit more difficult. So I just always round it up. And what I'm going to do is pop it onto a board here, and I'm now going to trim these down to measure 3.5 inches. The finished size of this block is 9 inches. Now I'm right-handed. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure on this little 6.5-inch square, you can use whatever square you want, 6.5, 9, 12. We sell the 6.5 and the 12.5 on the website. If you've never had one before, buy a big one. And what I'm doing is I'm popping the diagonal line that's on the ruler onto the seam that I've sewn. And I'm just making sure that the 3.5-inch marks, which are here on the ruler, are sitting within that square, because I want to trim this up perfectly. And I'm just going to actually stand up. I'm using the Prim Love cutter, which means that I don't have to expose the blade and cover the blade. If you're using a traditional one, please cover the blade each time you do a cut. So I'm cutting up this side here and then across the top. It's one of the very few occasions that you'll actually cut not away from you, shall we say. And then you're going to turn your mat, your cutting mat around. Don't move your fabric. Now this end here is a perfect 45 degrees, so that can now go where the 3.5 inches line is on my ruler, and the diagonal line is going across the seam. Pop your fingers in the centre like that and trim off the excess. And you're going to do that with all 8 half square triangles. The waste is minimal, but what it means is that you achieve a perfect 3.5-inch square, which allows the next part of your sewing to be even more accurate. So once you've done that, an additional use for these mats is that they make a really good design boards. And here's some I've prepared earlier. And this block is all down to the orientation of your half square triangles. So what you're doing is the fabric that was in the centre, okay, this is the fabric that's in the centre, that's your 3.5 inches. The other fabrics, you're basically going to point in, make sure I've got this right, yes. So all of these squares are going in. Can you see this part here is pointing towards the centre square. And then you have your contrast fabric is working as a pinwheel. And we're going to sew these together in rows. So I've left this row here. We sew one row. There's your middle row. And this is the last row to do. And I'll show you how to press as well. So I'm just going to flip this one onto here like that. And I always start my sewing at the edge that doesn't have a seam on this front here. Now, the other thing that I worry about is when I pick it up to the sewing machine is, will I remember which side to sew on? So I just tend to pop a pin in there like that, so I know it's the right side, and then I can accurately make sure that I get my corners right. I'm just going to pop my glasses on, that I get the corner pinned right here like that, and then I can move that pin, and that one is in the corner there. And because I've trimmed all of these to 3.5 inches, it's perfect. The problem with triangles is this is a bias strip here as well. So if you were to cut triangles, it can sometimes lead to a little bit of distortion. And then we're going to take it back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew down this line here. So I'll just pop you back over here. And I got a little bit too far. And we're going to sew down that line here. Now again, you could be chain piecing because you could have had all of your pieces popped in, pinned, ready to go, and then just literally sew one after the other. It's just sometimes easier on a video for me to get a little bit ahead, because I'm sure you don't want me to see the same thing time and time again. So once you've sewn that line there, we'll cut it out. So can you see I've just sewn down here. We're going to take it back to the pressing mat. And the beauty about these pressing mats, as I say, is it not only is a layout area, but it's also a pressing mat here as well. And don't forget to set the seam. It's really important that you set the seam. And setting the seam is just putting some heat onto it there. Okay. Now, what I want to do is to make sure I've got this in the right way. So that isn't right, it's that way. And I'm just checking I've pressed that seam this way, so I want this seam to go this way. And I'm just going to press it like that. And because of the wool pressing mat, the heat is coming from the bottom and the top, and you get a lovely crisp seam. Can you see that there? Oops, pop that back. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip this one now onto here. And this is the first time that we're having to really match up seams. And can you see I've got one seam, because I've thought about my pressing, I've got one seam going one way and one seam going the other. And I'm just going to check it's in place there. Pop a pin there. And now I can pop a pin at the end. So I just make sure that my corners are in the corner as such. Like that, pop a pin there. The next one is I'm going to match this seam up, and if you pop the seams together, they'll lock in position, and then we can pop a pin in like that. And then finally, there's a pin going on that end there. Now, if you're not happy or you feel more comfortable, you can always add some extra pins in the center there. This one's just moved a little bit, so I'm just going to add another pin in. There's no rules, but I think you need a minimum of 4 pins on this particular one. But as I say, if you feel that any of your fabrics are moving, just stick another pin in, and we're going to go back to the sewing machine and we're going to sew down this line here. Again, using the 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now, thread wise, I'm using the Orifil thread because I find that it beds into the seam beautifully. It's a 50 weight thread. It's Italian cotton, and also the other thing about it is it doesn't have any lint on it, which means it's not going to, in the areas of the machine that I can't clean easily, it's not going to have some extra fluff, shall we say, from the thread, the fibres from the thread, which in the long run is very cost effective because it's keeping my machine nice and clean. It means I don't have to take it to the engineer as much as I need to. Now, when you get to here, can you see this foot is just, it was just curling that seam. So I've raised the presser foot and then carried on sewing, and make sure you sew straight, which is the hardest thing, is you come to the end of your seam that you actually sew off the patchwork block and sew it straight. So I've sewn along that line there. Take these out, and then we're going to, I'm going to show you how to press that final seam. Now, when you have seams that are joining together, you can have a lot of bulk, and the bulk is here. So if I was just to press that there, can you see this would look very lumpy? So this is where your Primlove scissors come into being, because they've got nice sharp ends. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to snip into there, snip, snip, and then snip, turn it over and snip on that side, and then snip here, one. So it's basically going to form this sort of little cross, and the final one there. Okay, now I'm going to lie it flat, and if you need to, you can use a pokey tool. Just play my little pokey tool here. Depends on your fingers, really. Sometimes my fingers aren't always the best. So all I do is, before I get the iron, is I just open that up there, and it's worth doing this. And what's going to happen is this seam's going to go this way. The seams are going to go in a clockwise direction. So just with your iron, and this is where the Prim iron is really good, is just, I press that there. That seam's going up that way. This seam's falling over anyway, and that seam's there. And I'm going to do the same on the other side. So do this on all of your points. just open it up. It can be, you can use a pin, you could use a stiletto, you can use your you know, your seam ripper, whatever you want to use. You'll immediately feel the difference when you start to press. So this time the seams are going that way, and this last seam is going to go up. Okay, and then what I can do now is pop it to the front and give it a press. So this is a motion block, called it. It's a 9-inch finished block. Just give it a nice press there. And I think it looks amazing because can you see, you're starting to see a little bit of motion, and if you had several blocks going, it would just be brilliant in a quilt. So I hope you've enjoyed that. That's block 14 of the 6 Penny Memories Sew Along. You can catch up with all of the other videos on our YouTube channel. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and then you'll get to see all of the future videos. And any products that you need to buy, you can visit our website, which is www.6six-penny.com, and don't forget to sign up for the newsletter and get 15% off all of your purchases. Thank you very much. Bye bye.